Welcome into SEC Primetime Live here on the Voice of College Football Network. We are not Josh Mahler and Blake Lane. It is two different people here filling in on this evening. Those guys weren't able to go, so we're stepping in to talk a little SEC football. I'm Andrew Miller from Mississippi State on the Voice of College Football Network, and this is Tucker Harlan from Tennessee on the Voice of College Football Network. And we're ready to talk about a really great weekend of SEC football. Tucker, how you going? How you doing? I said how you going. That doesn't work. But how are you doing?
No, it's going well, and I'm doing well. I'll say that much. Always happy to talk SEC football. Had a nice weekend this past weekend of just watching stress-free SEC football, and maybe something about the Vols being off and not playing a game allows my Titans to win a football game, which is something we haven't seen since last November. So I'm in a much better mood going into the week after having that. Because here's the thing: the Vols can win on Saturday, and then the Titans could just drag me into a torture chamber on Sundays. It's brutal, man. But no, I'm doing really well, and always happy to talk SEC football.
I can relate to so much of that. Both the idea of like the bye week, just being able to watch college football and just enjoy it. As a Mississippi State guy, I'm looking forward to even this year with the Bulldogs. They're not that bad of a team. Come a rough weekend in Aggie land, but they are clearly much better. It's been fun to follow them. I'm going to enjoy having my Saturday, just being able to sit around and watch what's going to be a really fun weekend of games. And then you talk about your Titans getting the win. My Saints find a way to get a win as well. And that was good for me personally with Jackson Dart being on the other side. And like early in the game, all the takes firing off of the Saints. You shouldn't have passed on Jackson Dart for the Saints to get the win there. Was both as a Saints fan and a Mississippi State fan. That worked out really, really well. But yeah, it was an eventful weekend of SEC football, even with a quiet slate. We are going to look back on the week that was back in, I guess that's week 6 of the season already, which it's crazy that we're basically at the halfway point of the year already. The season has flown by so quickly, really way too quick. But obviously, we're not going to spend a ton of time talking on these games. You guys know what happened. We do want to get our thoughts on them real quick. So we'll just run through the slate back from week 6. So you have to start in Gainesville. Florida getting the win over Texas, 29-21. If Billy Napier is about to get fired, you can just guarantee he will win the football game. He finds the way every single time. I would say Texas's offense struggling was no surprise. Florida, they've been bad all year, and Florida's defense, despite that team's struggles, has been pretty good. And in the swamp, you get it. I don't think anybody saw the offensive explosion that we got from the Gators in that game. And is Dallas Wilson the missing piece for the Gators? Is that who fixes everything for them? Because that offense had a huge day against what had been a very good Texas defense. Arch really wasn't that bad, but there's just so much wrong around him right now. The Longhorns look to be in trouble. Do we take anything away long-term from this game? I mean, for either side, is this just Napier doing what he always does and Florida's going to revert back to garbage? I mean, I think from Texas's standpoint, it's clear there's problems there.
Billy Napier is quickly transforming into the John Calipari of SEC football, a dude that will lose like 3 or 4 games in like a 5-game period. And suddenly you're just like, this dude, he's not going to make it out of the week. He's going to get fired. These fans are going to get so upset with him and want to run him off. And then he comes out and wins a game and makes you forget about it all. That's exactly what's happening here with Billy Napier at Florida. And this is by far DJ Lagway's best game of the season. He went for just shy of 300 yards, couple touchdown passes. And
really nice day for him.
like you mentioned too with Dallas Wilson, good day for him as well in his first game as a Gator. Jaden Ball, also a very nice game on the ground for Florida. Gators really dominated the line of scrimmage in this game. I was impressed. Texas, we know Texas is good defensively, but Florida did not allow a sack in this game, while they sacked Arch Manning 6 times on the other side. So impressive stuff there. And then just 52 total rush yards on the game for Texas. And Arch Manning being your lead rusher is not what you want when you're only getting 52 yards. And you said that Arch Manning did not look terrible. And while I agree with that, I just see so many things from him that just make me question how good of an SEC starter he can be. Like, did his uncles just, or his grandfather for that matter, just forget to teach him proper throwing mechanics? Like, I was quad boxing that game because I had that game, Bama Vandy, and Penn State UCLA on. And I was just watching him throw the ball because I'd seen the clips floating around from the Ohio State-Texas game in week 1, and they're still there. It's this same thing where he like rotates his hips but doesn't move his feet at all. It's so bizarre. So no, I don't think he's great. And other thing too, Andrew, that I'll mention, and I'm not going to say that I said this would happen, but people did not talk about a disaster scenario in which Texas starts the season 3-3. Well, guess what? We're 1 game away from it with Red River on the horizon.
It's kind of crazy to think that's certainly a possibility. And you're right. Arch definitely has a long, long way to go. If he's ever going to come close to living up to the hype that was there. I will say the piece that went out on The Athletic, I don't know if you saw that, a couple like yesterday, that was kind of a little rough and a little bit unfair, I think. Like already calling him one of the biggest flop in college football.
The Athletic, man, they put out some real clickbait about Texas. They called them the next big dynasty in college football before they even won a national championship, and now they're just saying Arch Manning will never be good. Like, well, pick a side and stay on it. Don't ride both sides of the seesaw within a 2-week period.
It's pretty rough there from a narrative standpoint. But yeah, Texas has a lot of things that are getting figured out. And I'll say this for Florida. That looked like the Gators team I thought we would see coming into this year. I was pretty high on Florida. And like you said, dominant along the lines of scrimmage. That was supposed to be a great offensive line. And they've had issues up until this point. That was supposed to be a really good pass rush. And I think it's Caleb Banks who's still down. And I think on the availability report, still out for another week. But like they were supposed to be really good up front on both lines of scrimmage, and they finally had that game where they were dominant in that area, and you see them get the big win. So big test for them, obviously, with Texas A&M, as we'll talk about that game later here in the show. The other real big game of the weekend, Alabama 30, Vanderbilt 10. The Tide look like they're hitting the stride. Ty Simpson's playing like a man possessed. Right now, he looks like one of the very best quarterbacks in the country with the way he's playing. Their run game got a lot better with Jam Miller in. And defensively, all the issues they had last season trying to contain Diego Pavia in that Vanderbilt run game, much, much better this time. Now, Vandy did move the ball some. Couple red zone turnovers definitely played a big role. And obviously, Bama gets a late touchdown there to sort of balloon the score. This was a more competitive game than the final score indicates. But it's a testament to Vanderbilt that we're even talking about like a Bama performance there and saying that's a good takeaway for the Tide, that they are a genuinely better team at this point. You do have to give Vandy credit on that. They're a good football team, clearly still a couple rungs below when it comes to being an SEC contender. But look, Bama looks a lot better, and now they get a huge test this weekend with Mizzou. That's going to be a really fun game to watch in Como.
Yeah, Bama, I don't know what happened with Bama in those or in the first game of the season against Florida State, just a loss of focus or whatever. Lack of intensity down there in Tallahassee. I don't know what it was, but they've put that behind them. They got to win at Georgia. And you knew they were going to be motivated to play Vanderbilt. They're usually not, because they usually beat Vanderbilt, but they lost to them the prior season. And of course, the fan base has been upset about that for an entire year. So you figured they'd be motivated to come out there and beat up on Vanderbilt. And that's what happened. Ty Simpson does look very good for them. And I'd say that's probably, that's a team to watch going forward in the SEC. There's no teams that are just clearly above everybody else in the SEC, I don't think. But I do think Alabama is one to keep an eye on. And like you said, this weekend they've got their work cut out for them. But I like what they got going forward
Yeah, Bama looks like they've definitely turned it around from week one. But again, we'll know a lot more about that team this weekend. My Mississippi State Bulldogs went out to Aggie Land in a blackout, and it didn't go well for them. Texas A&M 31, Mississippi State 9. Look, an ugly game for about really one half plus most of the third quarter. Low score in both defenses making plays, but Mississippi State's offensive line just banged up and was not at all up to snuff against a really good Aggie pass rush. They had Blake Shapen under duress pretty much the entire night, and that's why State's offense was not able to get much going at all. And Mississippi State's defense, I thought, played as well as you could have asked them to, but Marcel Reed, once he sort of got into a rhythm there late, we saw the A&M offense look more like the unit we've seen this year with Casey Concepcion, Mario Craver, and those guys, and Ruben Owen stepping in at running back and having a really good game as well. So A&M is able to pull away late. Look, when the big plays are hidden for A&M, that offense is really special. And I know their defense has looked a little iffy early in the year, but back-to-back really impressive games for them on the defensive side of the ball. Looking more and more like a team that's going to be a real force in the SEC this year.
Yeah, so that's 19 total points they've allowed in just 2 SEC games, which is not something I expected coming into SEC play just because they looked kind of questionable in those first 2 non-conference games and gave up 40 to Notre Dame, but Notre Dame does look really good on the offensive end, I will say that. I'm just waiting for the point in which A&M is going to stumble somewhere because it's happened basically every year since 2014 where they start the season off with 4 or 5 wins and then somebody from the state of Mississippi or LSU or Alabama comes along and it just derails the entire season. We'll see where that happens if it happens, but no, overall very good game for A&M. They look good defensively as we mentioned, and then ran for close to 300 yards on the ground. So. Good for them, but hated for Mississippi State, man. Because we were talking a little bit off air before we started the show about that Tennessee Mississippi State game a couple weeks prior that we did that preview for. And that's 2 teams that Tennessee's beaten now that have just been marred by injuries. Syracuse lost Steve Angeli for the year with a torn Achilles, so they're not looking good the rest of the way because of that.
They've fallen apart since he went down.
It's bad. It's real bad. So bad that their best wide receiver's uncle is calling into radio shows and saying we're going to start shopping in the portal, even though it's the backup quarterback that's in. So I don't really know why that is the appropriate response to take. And then again with Mississippi State too, there's like 4 guys on that team. Will Whitson was out before the Tennessee game, so I won't count that one. But that's 3 guys that have gone down since that Tennessee game began that are really important pieces to Mississippi State. So I obviously think Mississippi State's a better team this year than last year and should be capable of winning an SEC game at the very least. It's just going to be tough with all the injuries.
Yeah, they're going to have to get healthy, and the good bye week fell at a really good time for them. And I know we mentioned it off air, but for those who saw Fluff Bothwell go down late against Texas A&M, does sound like positive news for him. That it seems that all the imaging came back well and that he'll be able to hopefully return here later in the season, which would be huge. He's been a really fun player to watch for the Bulldogs, been good for their offense, but also that's just, you want a guy named Fluff Bothwell running over players in the SEC. We need that. Last couple games to talk about from the weekend. Georgia 35, Kentucky 14. Good for Georgia to be able to just handle business with relative ease here. And I know we don't take too much away from a game against Kentucky, but Georgia's had a lot of these games over the years where they kind of just fool around and do not look particularly impressive. And I think they probably had those to start the season. And coming off they were coming off the game against Alabama, taking the loss there, bounce back. Wasn't just total domination, like just clean football completely, but they win the game with relative ease, and you'll take that, I think, if you're a Georgia fan.
Yeah, Stockton threw an interception in the game, I believe. So, no, not by any means a totally clean game, but just like looking at what Georgia's done the previous couple SEC games, it's good to see that, or good for Georgia fans at least to see them handle a team with relative ease. And I'd say this game went about how I expected, because usually when Georgia and Kentucky play up in Lexington, it can be competitive. It's not been the case in Athens, and sure enough, it was the case here, because you saw them give up like 1 or 2 coverage busts that gave up that first touchdown. But outside of that, like just in But before garbage time, they really had their way. You know, might have gotten in a couple third and longs, but they converted all the third and longs pretty much. Just when I was watching the game, so no, this went about how we expected. I think Georgia's still a very good SEC football team, and Kentucky. I don't think they're the worst SEC team that I've ever seen, but they're definitely the worst team in the SEC this year. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, they're just a classic, really bad football team. You know,
Yeah.
not an all-time bad team, but they're just a bad team this year, and not a lot of hope there in Lexington. But yeah, Georgia, huge test this weekend going to the Plains, how they're going to handle that rivalry game. And last game, Oklahoma 44, Kent State 0. It's Kent State, but Michael Hawkins steps in and was able to make a few plays for the Sooners. They're going to need him potentially to have a big game this weekend. I know we don't have a full update yet on Mateer. I know there's some hope.
Questionable is the wording on the availability report.
Okay. Yeah, I know there's hope that everything's going to go well with him, and that's really the key to that game, as we'll get to here in a bit. You know, with I'm not the biggest Hawkins believer, but he did handle his business in his first start of the season. And the Sooners defense, you know, regardless of who's in at quarterback, dominant unit. So they handled their business there. Big weekend of games ahead. You know, last weekend, a couple nice games, but it was kind of a quiet weekend across the SEC, had several teams off. This is a really exciting weekend. 7 games. Only one, I would say, that there's not any kind of intrigue in. But between, you know, Wazoo against Ole Miss, that's just sort of the one game where you expect things to go pretty heavily in favor of the SEC team here. And even some of the other games that are a little bit, maybe from a spread standpoint, a little bit lopsided. There's some intriguing storylines, to say the least. So really fun weekend of games. Let's get right into previewing it, and we'll just go in order, the way the games are going to fall on the schedule. So we start in Columbia, 11 a.m. Central Time on ABC. Number 8, Alabama travels to number 14, Missouri. The Tide are a 3.5-point favorite. 51.5 is your total. This is like the first time we get to really, truly figure out who Missouri is this season. You know, the Kansas game, I think there was a lot of excitement and hype around that. KU's not a bad football team, but they're nothing special, right, to rag home about. And then South Carolina, the Gamecocks have just been kind of a disappointment to this point. But Mizzou, to their credit, they have handled their business now through 5 weeks, 5-0. You see all the guys offensively that have been very impressive. Bo Perbula has stepped in at quarterback and played really well. Ahmad Hardy at running back. Kevin Coleman at receiver, big-time player. Over on the defense, Josiah Trotter, Zion Young at defensive end. A lot of guys who are really impressive players on that Missouri team. It's just a matter of how good are they going to be once you start facing big-time competition. I know a season ago, started off the season well, and they go down to College Station, and that game really went away from them. And it was still a 10-win Missouri team. They weren't a bad football team, but against the very best teams in the schedule, you know, like later in the season, I think it was 34-0, a loss to Alabama. The best teams they played were able to handle their business against them. Are they for real this year? That's going to be the question. And then from an Alabama standpoint, are they going to be – this is the toughest test they faced. You know, Florida State on the road, difficult environment to open up the season, and the Noles are still a pretty solid football team, but they've taken a couple losses now, and Miami really took it to them. And, you know, Vanderbilt, solid team, but you're playing at home. We also know Vandy probably not to the level of Mizzou. This is a really, really fun game, and this has huge implications for the season.
Yeah, it's funny, Andrew. This is the one ranked matchup in the SEC, and it's at noon. Funny how that happened. Probably because we just didn't foresee Texas falling out of the rankings entirely like they did this week. But no, Mizzou, it's crazy. Mizzou, this will be their 6th game of the season. They have not left Faurot Field. That's kind of impressive.
I did not realize that. And
unless they played Kansas and Kansas City, and I just didn't know. They have not left Faurot Field.
No, it was at home.
I was looking that up as you were talking just a second ago just to make sure, but no, it's kind of funny. They've not left Faurot Field. So I don't know if this is really the final boss or not. Obviously, it's the toughest team they've played to this point because we just hadn't seen them play a road game yet. But no, you're right. Kansas is a fun team, but I don't think they rise to the level of some of these other SEC teams. Like we've seen SEC teams that are lower half of the conference, like Auburn and Mississippi State, for example, do just fine against the Big 12. So I think that may be just part of it. And then South Carolina, I can't figure out South Carolina. I'm sure we'll talk about it later, but they're a little bit of a mystery right now. Mizzou does look very good on offense. I'll say that much. Ahmad Hardy, maybe the best running back in the SEC right now. Potentially, he's putting up crazy numbers every single week. It feels like, and Bo Pribula, what a find by Mizzou in the transfer portal. That dude was sitting behind Drew Aller, and Drew Aller, I think that draft stock is about to start going down. Just to be completely honest, and Pribula has looked so much better than he'd ever look at Penn State. I feel like all those Penn State quarterbacks are just exceptionally mediocre when they go through there. They just, happen to have good athletes around them. And, maybe they find their way onto an NFL practice squad like Sean Clifford or Trace McSorley, but that's the case with Aller. Good on Pribula for getting out of there, because I'll tell you what, man, Missouri, sneaky, not bad quarterback tradition. Drew Lock, even Matty Mock was good at times. Brady Cook, James Franklin was fun. Chase Daniel,
I got
quarterback there. So you've got some good quarterbacks that have come through Mizzou, and I'm very intrigued by this matchup just because it's another road game for Bama and a relatively. I just don't think the rest of the conference has paid a ton of attention to Mizzou just because you hadn't seen Mizzou play very many quality opponents outside of Kansas and South Carolina. Only one SEC game to this point too. So really looking forward to this one.
Yeah, that's what makes it so hard to gauge is we don't know for sure. Just like are the numbers they're putting up a product of being a very good team, or the numbers they're putting up a product of the schedule? And I did think Clint Lamb, who does a great job covering Alabama, something I saw him post over on Twitter is, if you can't go into this game assuming that the numbers are a product of the schedule. You have to go into this game assuming this is a product of a very good football team. And I think that's totally fair. And until proven otherwise, we have to assume this Mizzou team is legit, right? And that's going to make this a really fun game. And I'm sure it's going to be a crazy atmosphere, even for an 11 a.m. kick at Faurot Field. Two big things for me. And, when we go through these games, I try to look at, what are the key matchups and on each side of the ball. I look at Alabama's offensive line against the Missouri defensive line. Missouri has done a good job of generating pressure to this point of the season. 12 sacks, which I know just doesn't jump off the page, but guys like Damian Williams, Zion Young, they've been able to get after quarterbacks a little bit. And Alabama offensive line has not been a strength for them. Obviously, Florida State caused a lot of havoc in that game. Vanderbilt had 4 sacks last week. There were several times that Vandy was able to get pressure against that Alabama offensive line. I think if Ty Simpson has time in the pocket, he's been very, very good. And if they're able to find a way to get the run game going, that obviously takes some of the pressure off of him and you're not having to drop back and throw as much. But if they can protect him, I think Bama's offense can have a really good day. We've seen that to this point. But if Missouri's able to generate a lot of pressure, I think Bama might have a hard time dealing with it. I think it could be a rough day for the Tide offense. And then the other side, I guess it's so tough to know, man, because Missouri, we just haven't seen them tested. But I think you got to sell out to stop Ahmad Hardy if you're Bama's defense. Like Pribula, we just talked about, he's been very, very good, but we do want to kind of see it against a better defense. What does that look like? And Bama does have a pretty good defense at this point. I think if you're Bama, you have to look at Ahmad Hardy and say, okay, we know that run game, if that gets rolling, we're not going to be able to stop this offense. We have to take away Hardy and limit him as much as possible.
Yeah, and it's a real concern. You saw Florida State exploit a lot of weaknesses in the run defense for Alabama. Cedric Alexander ripping off a big touchdown run early in that game last week for Vanderbilt too. There's been a lot of concern about running the football for Alabama than stopping the run. Now, Jam Miller being back, I think, is at least something that will ease those thoughts a little bit of, we can't run the football. I think they'll be just fine doing that. But, yeah, I with Mizzou, it's how does Alabama properly scheme against them and try and slow them down. And, the Mizzou defensive line, like you talked about, and not that South Carolina is anything earth-shattering on offense, but anytime you beat a team like 300 to -5 in rush yards, your front seven is doing something right. I'll just say that much. So, and Bama, really since the end of the Nick Saban era, has not been stout on the offensive line like we're accustomed to seeing. We've seen some defenses. Michigan, Oklahoma, Tennessee all last season really just beat up on them. Florida State to start this season, and those have been games that they've lost. So I Yeah, I think those are definitely matchups to watch.
No, for sure. You talk about defending the run. I mean, again, we mentioned earlier Kansas not like the greatest opponent, but that's a KU team with Jalen Daniels at QB, and it's a team that wants to run the football and can be difficult to contain in the run game. They got shut down. They ran for 31 yards against Missouri. Mizzou's run defense has been very impressive, and that also plays into their defensive front being able to get sacks. So obviously at the college level, the sacks take away from the rushing yardage. So that's going to be a huge matchup. And again, I think if Bama can give Simpson time, I think they got a great shot at putting up some points. If they can't, and then if they can't contain Hardy on the other side, I think Mizzou's got a good chance. Spreads 3.5. We're not going to – I don't know if these are official picks, but we'll just give our leans. What are we thinking here? How do you feel this matchup goes?
This is so tough because I don't think it's going to be a super high-scoring game. I could see it being like 30-something to 20-something. I'm waiting on Kalen DeBoer to drop another oddball because that's what he's done at Alabama. I don't know if this would really be classified as one of those, but he's had a habit of losing to people that he shouldn't lose to. Again, I'm not sure if Mizzou is one of those teams, but it could be the case. I would say Bama probably wins a close game. I expect it to be competitive, though. I think Mizzou may be legit, and people were definitely overlooking them to start the season.
I was really, really high on the Tide going into the season, and I would say, you let week one happen. I don't think you can just overreact to that. You have to build on how the season has progressed, and since that point, they've looked more like the team I expected. That said, this is a tough road trip, and it's an early kickoff. You have Tennessee looming the next week, and obviously that game is going to be absolutely massive in Tuscaloosa. I think Bama could definitely get the win, but if I'm just going to make a pick against the spread, I'll take the Tigers at home plus 3.5. I could see this being a really tight game that goes down to the wire. This should be a really, really fun start to the day when it comes to SEC football. Game we're not going to really spend a lot of time on. 11:45 Central Time on the SEC Network. Wazoo taking on number 4 Ole Miss. Trinidad Chambliss still going to be the starter, which I don't even think that's a discussion at this point. I know Austin Simmons, they're still talking about, may not be fully healthy. And look, I don't want to write off his career. I understand there's still a lot of reason to believe he can be a very good quarterback. It's clear Chambliss is the guy for this team. But I think Ole Miss, look, the spread is massive. It's where is it at?
Still 31.5, right?
31.5, yeah, 31.5 point spread. I don't know if they cover that with Georgia the next week. I could see them kind of just trying to get in and out of this game. But Wazoo is not a good football team. The two best teams they have faced have absolutely destroyed them. Ole Miss will roll here.
Yeah, I'd say so too. And I do want to mention this because I'm glad that Washington State made this happen because Wake Forest opted out of the road trip to Oxford. So good on Washington State for making it happen. I don't think it's going to be a good game. Another reason to despise John Currie as an athletics director, if you didn't already despise him for the Shiano Sunday debacle, for those of you Tennessee fans watching this. So I think Ole Miss ends up winning this game big, though. You're right about Trinidad Chambliss. I think he's a good quarterback. And yes, they're trying to say Austin Simmons could be coming back, but honestly, why change at this point? He was iffy against Kentucky, and you've had a guy in Chambliss that's come out and delivered week after week for them. So, this should be a fun win for Ole Miss. And you never know. Lane might try and run up the score. That's just his style.
It is definitely a thing Lane will do. And I'm not saying that starkly as a Mississippi State fan. Like, hey, style points matter. Find ways to – I saw Bud Elliott from Cover 3 kind of calling out Ole Miss on social media for running up the score to bug metrics or whatever to get the numbers to like them a little bit. So maybe that's the approach you take in this game. But 31.5 is a lot. So I guess I'll take the Cougs to cover. I do hope Wazoo can get their football program going again. That's a fun team. Mississippi State's supposed to have a trip out there in a few years. I do wonder if they're going to keep that series, though, because that was supposed to be the Power 4 required game, but that's no longer a Power Conference team. So I wonder how that'll work for the SEC going forward. We'll see. But I think Ole Miss by a lot this weekend. Red River rivalry. I can't talk right now.
No one ever can say that, man. Red River rivalry. Try and say it 5 times fast. You can't.
2:30 p.m. Central Time on ABC out at the Cotton Bowl in Dallas. The story of this game is whether or not John Mateer plays. And like, just not to bury the lead, and I guess we can do picks here in a bit, but if Mateer plays, I'm just blindly taking Oklahoma to win this football game. I do not have reason to trust in Texas. I still think their defense is probably fine. I won't let one game in the swamp tell me that defense can no longer be really, really good. But their offense is such a disaster, and with as good as Oklahoma's offense has been Oklahoma's defense has been this year, I have a hard time seeing Texas being able to get much of anything going. If the better quarterback is healthy and able to play, and look, even if he plays, he may not be healthy, so that plays a role in this as well. But if Mateer plays and is able to play competently, I think Oklahoma is able to handle business. If it's Michael Hawkins, it becomes a lot more interesting.
I agree with you there, but I will say this, and again, this could be something that was just one of those fluky things that happened last year, and it may not have any bearing on this game. But I will say this as somewhat of a counterpoint. We've seen Oklahoma's defense take over a game with less than stellar quarterback play in the not so distant past against Alabama last year, winning the game by 3 touchdowns. What, they scored 2 defensive touchdowns in that game? I think Oklahoma's defense is that good to where if Michael Hawkins is the starter, they could muck it up and make it, a low-scoring, nitty-gritty win for the Sooners. I think that's highly possible. So, obviously, the odds are against them a little bit if Mateer doesn't play, but I do think that's somewhat of a possibility to be looking for.
No, to be clear, I still think OU could absolutely win this football game, even if Hawkins plays. For me, it's just a matter of if Mateer plays, I feel very strongly Oklahoma's getting this win. But if it's Hawkins, then it becomes a little bit more of a toss-up because I'm not the biggest believer in him, and him going up against a Texas defense that's probably still pretty good. Could play a big role. I think. Look, let's assume it's Hawkins. I don't know if Mateer's going to be back here. I think what it comes down to is it's when it comes to the Oklahoma offense. Can Texas force Michael Hawkins to have to throw? Can they do that? And if they can he beat them? That's how Texas's defense has to be able to get stops. I think you have to make him be able to – you have to make him throw the football. I think if you just let them run the ball, it's going to be a long day for Texas. We have Inside the Huddle here. Defensive ball game. John's not playing until Ole Miss in 3 weeks. I mean, I definitely think that's a real possibility. And this could definitely be, a little bit of gamesmanship in terms of talking about Mateer's availability here, which it leads into what you talked about. OU's defense probably has to lead the way here. But if you're Texas defensively, I think your chances it also centers around force Hawkins to have to beat you with his arm and see if he's even able to do that at all. For the other side, I mean, I just don't trust Texas's offense against the OU's defense. I really think Texas's chance of putting points on this board back to the defense. Can you force turnovers? Because I will say this, OU has had an issue with turnovers to this point of the season. They're also not forcing a lot of them. Meanwhile, Texas has done a pretty good job of forcing turnovers at this point. If Texas's defense can force a few turnovers and give their offense short field, then you got a chance in this ball game. But that's if it becomes a case of turnover battle equal and Texas's offense having to drive the length of the field consistently against an OU defense, I don't trust them to be able to do that.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up the point with Hawkins too, because I actually got to see, at least on TV, I wasn't at the game, but got to see his first appearance in that Tennessee game last year. And I'll tell you this, the guy can run. He's a very, very fast runner. I do not trust him as a passer, though. So now if he starts running the ball well on Texas, watch out if he's the starter. I'll say that much. But and I don't know, you can see change year to year. Maybe what he did against Kent State is something that proves that he's a better quarterback this year. I'm not entirely sure about that, but if he starts against Texas, we'll just have to see. But and Texas did not have as much trouble against that Oklahoma defense last year as some of those other teams did that we saw Oklahoma play against, and in some cases beat, like Alabama. But I think it's just different this year because you don't have so many of the same personnel at wide receiver to catch those screens. I don't know if it's a Ewers thing or what, but
O-line is a big part of it. I mean, they lost 4 starters.
They did. Kelvin Banks going up front and all those other guys. Yeah, you're right about that.
Yeah, that was that was an overlooked part of the offseason. What Texas was losing up front along the offensive line. I think there was so much hype around Arch and the excitement there for that offense that it was just sort of like completely ignored that, hey, this is going to be a first-time starting quarterback, full-time starter, behind a brand-new offensive line. How is that supposed to go? And it hasn't gone well for them. OU, 1.5-point favorite in this game, over-under of 43.5. Look, even though I'm not the biggest believer in Michael Hawkins, I just don't trust Texas at all right now. I'll take OU to win the game, and at a 1.5-point spread, I'll take them to cover.
Yep, I will too. I think you could see this being like a 20-14 type game with just a bunch of turnovers. It feels highly possible if Michael Hawkins plays.
It is going to be a very ugly football game. Which we said all this. Now, I mean, It is Red River, so I'm sure it'll turn into a shootout.
That's the funny thing is, like, when they're in the Big 12, you never thought about it like this. Or at least like when Oklahoma had its run of those great quarterbacks and, of course, Lincoln Riley and the Grinch stealing any signs of Christmas on defense for Oklahoma. You're looking at 50-49 all the time.
Yeah, those were a lot more visually appealing than I think this game is going to be. Yeah. Not to hate defensive football. That does happen sometimes. We talk about beautiful football and sometimes
I love good D-line play.
If it's good D-line play, for sure. But I think
I played defensive line in my 4 years of football, my 4-year football career. I love good defensive line play.
In 2 good D-lines in this game. So hopefully we get good defense and not just bad offense. Arkansas, coached by Bobby Petrino, going on the road to Neyland Stadium, 3:15 on the SEC Network against number 12, Tennessee. Tucker, your Tennessee Volunteers. So I'll let you have first crack at it. What are your thoughts going into this matchup?
So Tennessee will not see a worse Power 4 defense all year than Arkansas. I'm just going to be completely real. Yes, I understand that there was an overhaul in defensive staff with Bobby Petrino getting rid of the defensive coordinator, Travis Williams, his co-DC, and his defensive line coach. And that could change the scheme, and maybe it looks a little bit different. But if you're botching the basics, like just tackling technique and, having guys, entrapped around 4 defenders and somehow letting them score touchdowns, no amount of scheming can fix that. So it's a disaster on the defensive end for Arkansas. Now, we'll say this. I think Arkansas will be able to score some points in this game. Tennessee's defense is better than people are giving it credit for. And, in fact, David Hobbs is going to be back this week too, so defensive line will be fully healthy for the first time all season. They'll still be without their 2 best corners, though, which that could cause some problems in the secondary if Taylor Green is able to hit on some things. But offensively, I think Arkansas could be a challenge for Tennessee just because you got a running quarterback in Taylor Green. And I discussed this on our show, Tennessee Volunteers Live, on Monday. But the weird thing about that game in Arkansas last year is Taylor Green did not use his legs at all. He just threw all over Tennessee. And it worked to some extent. They didn't score on any passing touchdowns in that game, come to think of it. It was a run touchdown by Jaquindon Jackson, and then Malachi Singleton, the backup quarterback, coming in and scoring a touchdown late in the game after that. But no, he had it going with Andrew Armstrong in that game. Armstrong is gone now, but they still got some good receivers. Omega Blake is a nice, tall, wide receiver for them. You're going to see a lot of RPOs in this game from Arkansas as well. They can hand it off to their bruisers of running backs. I thought Fluff Bothwell was going to be the biggest bruiser Tennessee plays all year. That is not at all the case. Arkansas is bigger at running back than Fluff Bothwell, which is impressive.
It's Russell, right?
Braylon Russell is like 6'3", 240. I mean, he's approaching Derrick Henry size, which is scary.
Mississippi State fans were introduced to him last season. And obviously, that was a very bad Mississippi State defense, but that was a game. The guy who was their top back last year was hurt, and Russell was the top back, and he ran for like 150 and 3 touchdowns on state and just was bowling guys over. Again, terrible state defense, but he's a very physical runner. And Mike Washington also, the other running back, very good player.
He's 6'2", 225, and he looks small compared to Taylor Green because Taylor Green's so tall, which is kind of bizarre to think about. But no, Arkansas has put up points on the road in both its road losses this year. Not sure what happened against Notre Dame. They just weren't able to find the end zone much. But no, I expect them to find the end zone a couple times against Tennessee. But overall, Tennessee will be able to do whatever it wants on offense in this game. I said that after Tennessee scored 41 on Georgia, they're going to be able to do it against anybody. They do it against Mississippi State, even though if it was in a little bit of a different fashion, they were still able to do it with the defensive touchdowns. I think anything less than 42 points in this game for Tennessee will be considered a disappointment, just because Arkansas is that bad on defense.
Yeah, I think I have a pretty similar read on this game. Look, Bobby Petrino, I'm sure he's going to do everything he can to put together a great game plan. He had an extra week to prepare, obviously the Hogs being off, and going into this game, I think you may have mentioned this before we went live, but it was the idea of he's vying for the job. He's got to make a statement if at all possible. Yeah. And if it weren't for the fact that Arkansas got the win last year, you could maybe talk about the letdown factor with which, Tennessee's coming off a bye, correct?
Yeah. And Josh Heupel, by the way, in his career, and he did lose a game at Arkansas last year off a bye, so do keep that in mind. But he is 7-2 total between Tennessee and UCF out of byes. The only losses being on the road. Never lost at home out of the bye week.
The fact that the trip to Tuscaloosa is the next week, maybe you raise an eyebrow, but I do think the fact that, like you just mentioned, they lost to Arkansas a season ago. Like, this is a game that's going to matter to them quite a bit. And I think Arkansas will be able to find some way to score points if they can keep Taylor Green upright. And which, to give Arkansas credit, their offensive line's been a lot better this year than I thought it was going to be coming in. They've done a much better job in pass protection than they did a season ago. And that, of course, is Tennessee's strength as a defense, is getting after quarterbacks. They do that as well as anybody in the country. If they can give Green time, I think he can make some plays and, as you mentioned, be able to put a few points on the board. But I don't see how Tennessee is not able to name their number offensively in this game. I think, well, let's see, what's the point spread? It was 12.5 or 11.5 here on ESPN. Total 68.5. I think Tennessee should be able to get the cover there, but I think it'll be a high-scoring game, fun to watch.
Yeah, I do too. And I mentioned this too. Obviously, Georgia is an exception, but when Josh Heupel is playing against teams that he's lost to the previous season that aren't named Georgia, he is 6-0. I know Georgia, there's 4 losses in there. And then think about this too, like Florida and Alabama are teams that traditionally have found ways to beat Tennessee. So I don't include them as much in this. I would liken this game a little bit to what Tennessee had in 2023 against South Carolina. You're coming off a just totally devastating loss the year before. You lose 63-38 down there in Columbia. Hendon Hooker blows out his ACL. You lose your college football playoff hopes and dreams all in one spell. And you're really, really upset about what happened the previous year. You've already lost an SEC game to Florida that season, so you're going to be really upset going into that game. And I expect to see a pretty similar result on Saturday when Tennessee plays Arkansas. I will be at that game, by the way, so I will have a firsthand experience as to what that environment is like for a little revenge outing for the Vols.
We need Bobby P going out on a motorcycle. Right.
Yes. It's like what's his name? The interim for state when they fired Arnett. Greg Knox riding out on the ATV. That was awesome. Yeah. But no, but it'd be funnier with the motorcycle though. Obviously,
it's a lot funnier. Shout out to Greg Knox, Mississippi State interim coach legend. Even with the last game not going the way he wanted to.
No.
Moving into the night slate, 6 p.m. on ESPN. Florida taking on number 5 Texas A&M. A game that suddenly got a lot more interesting after the last week's results. And I guess that's the big question. Is Florida for real? Was this a one-off for the Gators? Billy Napier rallying the troops because he was going to get fired? Can they build off of, or is he going to build off this? That is the question. Because if we get the Florida team we saw a week ago, and I'm not trying to overreact to what they did against Texas, but I mentioned this earlier. The way Florida looked in this last game was the Florida team I was expecting this season. If they can look like that, I think they have an opportunity in this game at Texas A&M. Otherwise, I think Texas A&M is at home. They're clearly the better team to this point. Point spread in this one, 7.5 in favor of the Gators, total 46.5. So A&M still more than a touchdown favorite at home. We're not overreacting too much to one game just yet. This really does come down to how legit is Florida.
I was just trying to think, who would you say in his tenure at Florida is Billy Napier's best SEC road win to this point? I know this is a whole can of worms we're opening here, but I'm just trying to think. Like, he beat Mississippi State on the road last year. Mississippi State was terrible.
Yeah, fantastic win.
He beats South Carolina on the road the year before. They went 5-7. He beat Texas A&M on the road the year before. They went 5-7. And I think A&M is a more than competent team. Like, I'm genuinely trying to think, and I don't know the answer.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I'm running through it right now. He really doesn't have him, does he?
Yeah.
Okay, he won at Texas A&M, and was he? No, he wasn't there in 2022. That was
no, he was, but they were 5-7 that season. A&M was. Remember with Haynes King and Connor Wigman?
Yes. Okay.
Yeah. So that was not a good team.
He's not beating a good team on the road, so that does not bode well for him in this matchup.
No, it does not. That's what I was just trying to think of. And I think it's a battle of defenses more so than anything in this game. Like, can Florida's defense slow down Marcel Reed and what was a good rushing attack last week for Texas A&M against Mississippi State? And again, DJ Lagway. DJ Lagway is one of those quarterbacks in the SEC, and you see it too with guys like Lenora Sellers, I guess from time to time, Arch Manning, where you see these flashes of potential, but you don't see it consistently. And then they get hyped up for the next season, like, oh, they're going to be so good this year. It's like, yeah, there were glimpses of it. I'll believe it when I see it, though. And, up until last week, we haven't seen that much of it. So, and again, Billy Napier, he's not won a big game on the road yet against, like, a really good team. He's not beating a team that's better than 5-7 on the road, as we just mentioned. So, my initial thoughts are to lean Texas A&M here. I don't know how they managed to finesse their way into 3 straight home games to start SEC play, but there you go.
Key matchups for me here: A&M's pass rush against the Florida offensive line. First few weeks of the season, Florida's up front was not playing as well as you would have hoped them to, but against Texas, they did a great job. They kept DJ Lagway protected, and they also did a good job blocking in the run game. A&M defensively, like, got guys up front who, I know it's not the same big name players that they had a season ago, but that defensive line has played really well here early in the season. And guys like Cassius Howell, and then obviously at linebacker, Torian York, like, they've got players who can create a lot of problems up front. Can Florida handle that? Can Florida build off that a second week in a row? If they can do that, then their offense might have a chance, because otherwise A&M's defense has been a little bit gettable. But it all comes down to being able to protect up front and handle things along the line of scrimmage. Even last week against Mississippi State, when they were just running the football, actually had some success. It was more when they got into passing situations where they just couldn't protect, and it was a big problem. So can Florida get the run game going and help them out here? And then on the other side, can Florida's defense limit the explosive plays? Texas A&M's offense has been pretty reliant on explosives throughout much of the season. They've not been a good third down team. They've kind of been a team where it's like, we have to hit the big plays. If we're hitting the big plays, we're having a lot of success. If we're not, haven't been able to consistently move the chains. Florida's defense has played pretty well, but Florida's defense has also given up a lot of big plays. They gave up big plays to South Florida, and that was just enough of a difference. LSU didn't hit a ton in that game, but Miami was able to get a few. Texas was able to get back in the game by being able to hit some big passing plays in that game. So if you're Florida, can you limit A&M from hitting the explosive plays? Those are going to kind of be the key things I look at in this matchup.
Yeah. I feel like you have to limit those if you're Florida, and they've got some guys that can do that. Obviously, you know about one with Mario Craver and Casey Concepcion, another guy that can do that for Texas A&M. You got some good running backs on that team as well. So those two usually play some pretty fun games when they're out there in College Station. I just remember that was Johnny Football's first SEC game all the way back in 2012.
Yes.
But Florida won the game. I do remember that because they were 11-1 that season and lost to Louisville in the Sugar Bowl. And then they played that game the COVID season too, where Florida was like a big favorite going in, and then A&M, because that's one of the COVID season's one of A&M's best seasons is joining the SEC, and A&M won that game. So I would not be surprised if we saw another instant classic out there, just with the way these two teams are.
I think it'd be a fun game. Look, 7.5 does feel a little bit like a lot. I don't want to overreact too much last week, but I think the Gators can cover that. But I think I trust Texas A&M to ultimately get the win when it's all said and done.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, no. I didn't have much. I just said I was agreeing with you.
We'll move to the Deep South's oldest rivalry, 6:30 p.m. Central Time on ABC. Number 10, Georgia travels to the plains of Auburn to take on the Auburn Tigers. Auburn coming off a bye, getting an opportunity here to kind of reset after an ugly game out in College Station with the aforementioned Texas A&M Aggies. Look, it's Hugh Freeze in a rivalry game at home off a bye, and you got Georgia where the next week they've got Ole Miss, big revenge game, number 4 team in the country coming to Athens. Not that Georgia's going to overlook this game, but Auburn not being a good team, it all kind of factors in. I say Auburn's not being a good team. They haven't looked great to this point. We'll see how they look in this game. Look, everything kind of points to like this could be one of those spots. Hugh Freeze does what Hugh Freeze does and finds just a random win, and Auburn's able to pick off a big rivalry upset at home. I mean, I know the Tigers haven't looked great, but I could see this being a fun football game.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think too, because outside of that 2021 game, Auburn at the very least has played Kirby Smart close every single time that he's gone down there to the Plains. In fact, they had that big win back in 2017, I believe. That was the one.
That was a blowout.
Before they met in the SEC championship,
right.
And it kind of nullified it a little bit. But man, Auburn, it's one of the worst offenses in the league to this point. I feel like, and it's crazy because you look at that Baylor game and they're just pushing Baylor around all game long on the road with that offensive line. But no, they've seriously been awful in each of their last 2 SEC games. Granted, they have not played a meaningful game at home yet, unless you consider Ball State meaningful, which I obviously don't. But yeah, how will they be able to respond there? Can they get something going through the air? They've not been able to do that yet this year. You look at their big wins. I know Jackson Arnold has like 1 300-yard game against one of those 2 cupcakes they won in those first 3 weeks. Didn't do much at Baylor. Obviously didn't do much against Oklahoma or Texas A&M. 177 total yards of offense in that A&M game. We know Georgia can defend the run well, so and Auburn is going to look to run the football. So I don't know if that's going to be a problem for them or what. We saw Gunnar Stockton look a little more human these last couple weeks, and that Auburn defense is good. It's the reason why they stayed in those games at Oklahoma and Texas A&M. So I feel like that has to be the way Auburn stays in. They want to muck it up a little bit and make it dirty in order to try and stay in the game. But I just like if you're not able to get enough stops on defense, I feel like this could turn into a home blowout for Auburn seriously. And that and then the whole situation with Hugh Freeze too is a mess. It just feels like a bubble waiting to burst with him and the boosters down there on the plains, honestly.
Which makes this game all the more big for him. No, you talk about can Auburn find the passing game? That is so key for me in this game. When you look at Georgia defensively, we saw Tennessee was able to have a really big day through the air. Ty Simpson in Alabama were able to have success throwing the football. I know Kentucky did not have a very good day, but like the few successful plays they had offensively were through the air against Georgia. If you're Auburn, do not think you can trust being able to just line up and run the football in this game. I know Hugh Freeze talked about coming out of A&M like, well, we got to commit to running the football even if we're only getting 2 or 3 yards a carry. I get that, and obviously Arnold is a big part of that as well. If Auburn's just going to line up and try to run the football, they're not going to have success in this game. I don't think they're going to be able to do that. It is, can you throw to Cam Coleman? Can Jackson Arnold complete a pass downfield to one of the best receivers in the country? Like, that guy's legit. He just doesn't get the football because of who is trying to throw it to him right now. Auburn's chances of putting points on the board come down to whether or not they can get this pass game going. If they can do that, if Arnold can show he is an actual threat with his arm, then Auburn's going to have a chance to put some points on the board. And I have to imagine that's been a big emphasis for them throughout the bye week. Other side of the ball, can Georgia finish in the red zone? Georgia's been a really good red zone offense this point of the season. They've done a great job of getting into the end zone specifically. It's not just getting down and scoring in the red zone. It's actually turning those drives into touchdowns. What Auburn has done really well defensively is getting those stops in the red zone against Baylor, against Texas A&M. And I know A&M, some of it was a little bit self-inflicted, but and I think even against Oklahoma as well. They did a good job of getting stops, whether it be 4th down stops or holding to a field goal after long drives and holding them out of the end zone. Like, that's kind of what the Auburn defense has done really well. Auburn's defense is definitely going to have to do that in this game, I think, to be able to limit Georgia. But if you're Georgia, you have to capitalize on those opportunities. So I think how that chess match plays out will be a big key in how this game ends up finishing.
Yep. And I think ultimately Auburn can keep this game close just because we've seen them do it in the past. But it just feels like we're getting closer to now or never with Hugh Freeze down there. They've had so many painstakingly close losses. And, year one, it was okay because they were against Georgia and Alabama, and those were both teams that were close to getting into the college football playoff at that point. And even Ole Miss that first year too, they were a 10-win team that won a Peach Bowl. But now you look at last season, it's against Cal and Arkansas and Oklahoma and Vanderbilt, all these 6-win teams. You don't want that. You don't want to be on the wrong side of close losses to 6-win teams as in your second year as a head coach and regress from 6 to 5 wins in your second year. We saw that at Tennessee under none other than Derek Dooley, and he was out in 3 years. So it's getting pretty warm down there on the plains if it wasn't already.
Yeah, and we talk about Hugh Freeze and getting the big wins, and I know that's how I started off, like this little segment talking about the game, but the big win to this point at Auburn was Texas A&M last year at home.
Yeah.
Which was a good A&M team, an A&M team that went into the last week of the season with a chance to go to the playoff, but it's not like that's not the game when you're at Auburn that like winning that game is going to make a statement. Like other than that, it's
Mississippi State
a win against Alabama in year one.
Mississippi State's their next best win in 2023, I think, which is Zach Arnett, Mississippi State. They're 5-7 because you had Arkansas and Kentucky that they beat the year before, and then in 2024, but they're both 4-8, and then Vanderbilt, 2-10 Vanderbilt on the road. So not many good wins.
Yeah, no, like he hasn't had them. Like he needs a win like this to, as you talked about, to get the boosters off of him and be able to hold on to that job for another year. So it's going to be big. Georgia 3.5-point favorite on the road, total 46.5. I think right now I'm just going to lean Georgia. I don't have a ton of faith in Auburn.
Yeah, I'm with you there. They've not won that game since that 2017 game we mentioned earlier. Auburn hasn't. It just feels like it's got to be. It's not going to be a super high scoring game. Both teams could break the 20s, but at the highest it'd be like 24-20. I don't see it going much further beyond that because I think Auburn's defense is good enough to potentially slow down Georgia, but I just don't see them getting it done.
Do think it'll probably be a fun game to watch. So last game that we're going to talk about here tonight, South Carolina on the road at number 11 LSU. Look, this is a game that going into the year, and this is 6:45 p.m. Central Time on the SEC Network. Man, there was so much hype around this game preseason. We're thinking we're going to see 2 first-round quarterbacks facing off against each other in this game. A ton of excitement, ton of hype. This could have playoff implications. And, oh my, we are settling in for what might be one of the most disgusting football games played this weekend because both of these teams have been so awful on the offensive line, and bad O-line play is really hard to watch. And I know both quarterbacks have also not played great either. I can't put it all on them given what I just talked about the offensive lines for these two teams. Tucker, this is going to be an ugly game to watch.
Man, if you guys were on those drugs that told you that Garrett Nussmeier and Lenora Sellers were the next Heisman in 2025, please give me some of them. I'd really like to try it sometime. It's intriguing.
Hand up on Nuss. I'm a Nuss guy. I'm still not a disbeliever. I have an affinity for QBs that do that are classic pocket passers, which I know are a dying breed. But unfortunately, those guys, when the offensive line in front of them is garbage, it gets bad real quick. And Nuss is a guy that has always sort of been a case of he tries to do some things that he probably shouldn't, and it's happening this year.
He was always going to be a step down from Jaden Daniels, so it's kind of hard to hold that against him. But it's like, he's a fine quarterback. I don't necessarily look at him as a guy that's just really going to ball out at the next level. But no, my initial thoughts on this game, you're going to see a lot of defense. Again, I feel like I've said that a lot already about these matchups, but South Carolina, they've had at least 2 or 3 games already where they've scored at least 2 defensive touchdowns, or at least 1 defensive touchdown, I should say. Special teams are going to be involved somehow with the Shane Beamer coached football team. That's just what happens. But again, Lenore Sellers, like, can he make a play when it matters? That's been one thing that I've been searching for in a lot of games this season and haven't found it outside of the Virginia Tech game, which obviously we know Virginia Tech is not a very good football team. And South Carolina, I don't think has beaten LSU in close to 30 years now. I want to say it's like 1995 was the last time that it happened. And you're right about that LSU offensive line, man. That is another one that was going to be a pretty serious downgrade just with all the talent they lost to the NFL draft from this past season in 2024. But the evolution of LSU stylistically over the last 10 years has been intriguing to watch. They used to be this, we're going to run the ball, 40 times a game, maybe score somewhere between 17 and 20 points, and then just grind you up on the defensive end, to we're going to throw for 400 yards, play just enough defense to beat you. And suddenly they're back to playing the good defense again, but they've stopped running the ball well. That's the insane part. And it's not like they're
can't run it.
They're not
suck at it.
Yeah, they're not throwing all over teams either. They can't run the ball well. And I thought Caden Durham's not a bad running back. It's just like they have not been able to run the ball well. And that's something that I feel like you look at all the good LSU teams over the last 25 years, they have had some serious bell cows at running back. Not that Caden Durham can't be, but man, the offensive line is really letting them down this year.
Yeah, it is definitely not a strength for this team. You are like South Carolina. I think it's 6 total non-offensive touchdowns here already in the season. So they do have that going for them, and maybe that becomes a key play in this game.
But what if you don't get it, though? That's the big problem.
Right. They kind of have to have those plays to be able to score because of the offense struggling the way it does. For me, I know we keep talking about offensive line. Which offensive line plays better? That's who wins this football game. Whichever offensive line performs better to me, I think they will get the win. I can see both defenses being able to make plenty of plays here. I can see both quarterbacks getting under duress and making some very boneheaded mistakes that maybe, as we just talked about, lead to points for the defense. Look, LSU is a 9.5-point favorite, total 43.5. I'm not trusting LSU to cover that at home. Like, not with the way – I don't believe in South Carolina. I don't think they're a very good football team. But even at home, LSU, unless they fixed a lot of things off the bye, 9.5 feels like a lot.
Yeah, this just feels like one of those classic knockdown, drag-out LSU home wins. It's a night game, so I'm not at all going to say South Carolina wins just because it's close to impossible to win down there in Death Valley. They always love giving LSU the night games, and I feel like that's what's going to happen here. But I would be shocked if LSU goes out there and scores more than 24 in the process of it.
It feels like it's definitely going to be low scoring.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that'll do it for us. Really fun slate of games. Glad we got to sit down and break it all down. Appreciate everyone who tuned in. If you could, subscribe to the channel. And we're going to try to get this thing back going on Wednesday nights. I know the schedule has not been fully set in. And obviously, I may or may not be a part of that, depending on the week. Same goes for Tucker. No, this was both like kind of a last-minute thing for us to fill in. But yeah, subscribe to the channel, and you'll definitely see Josh and Blake in the future. Maybe you'll see our faces every now and then. But hey, you can also subscribe to Mississippi State on the Voice of College Football, Tennessee Volunteers on the Voice of College Football. You want to keep up with what the Bulldogs and the Vols are doing and see more of us. And also our social handles are there. You can follow us over on Twitter. Mine's covered up. It's at AleState2020. But yeah, thanks to everybody who was tuning in and following along. We really appreciate each and every one of you. Thanks to Tucker for taking the time to join in, and we will see you all next time.
College football is even more exciting when you've got some action on the line, and the games are even better when you're cashing in. And the Voice of College Football is the place to be to get the greatest value. Start with my picks. 75% against the money line, 58% against the spread, and I've got a 40-plus year track record. 11-0 in the college football playoff for me last year against the money line, 8-3 against the spread. And I'm just the warm-up act. Steve Merrill of Wager Talk is our ace in the hole, show stopper. 7 years with the Voice of College Football, over 30 years in the industry. Steve gives us analysis on all the big games, but you can't miss Steve's weekly under-the-radar pick. 28-12 against the spread the last 3 years. You also get picks from some of our top analysts here at the Voice of College Football, including Corey Bratta, Matt Zemek, and Steve Dace. Check out those numbers. Become a YouTube or Patreon member for just $99 per month. Go to the main channel on YouTube, click join, and then select the betting tier. Do the same thing on Patreon. Make 2025 a winner now.